Hi, I'm Victoria Henderson, the host of Listen Up Home Buyers. I'm so happy to have with me today Peter Parente, a settlement and business development officer with Stewart Title, working out of the Washington, D.C. office. Peter, I know you're busy, but I'm so glad that you could meet with me today. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Of course, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and
Wonderful.
impart some of my title wisdom on all the listeners.
That is exactly what I want because as an exclusive buyer broker, I always want to make sure that my clients understand the entire process of buying a home. What you do is a huge part of that. I often, equate it with, their team Smith, and they're assembling their team. I'm part of their team, but you're a very important part of the strategy that goes into purchasing a home. So, can you just kind of start off by saying, first of all, what does a title company do?
So I joke with my clients that I'm the quarterback of the transaction. I bring all the parties together, not only at the end of the process to sign all the loan documents with the purchaser, but the purchaser actually has the right to choose the title company. And that's the person who ends up being the engine behind bringing together the lender. We bring together the seller, and we confirm and ensure the formal transfer of property from the seller to the buyer. And we handle all the escrow funds in a transaction.
Tell us, break some of that down. What are escrow funds?
So escrow funds are the funds that the buyer puts in as a deposit for the purchase of the property. What we call here in DC the earnest money deposit. We hold that until closing to ensure that the seller feels comfortable with the transaction and the buyer is showing good faith that they're going to get to closing. So that's escrow funds, one portion of it. The second portion is the money that comes in from the lender. And we hold that money as well when that money comes in, and we disperse it accordingly with what's called the settlement statement and the closing disclosure. We disperse those funds accordingly.
Okay. So when someone is purchasing a home, they do their homework, they shop around, they hopefully find exclusive buyer agents and brokers.
Of course.
And work with us. And then they also are going to be choosing their lender, as you mentioned. How can they go about evaluating title companies?
That's a great question. This is a really relationship-based business, and I firmly believe that. So if you have a good rapport with someone, I think that that's one great way to evaluate who your settlement officer is. And I always ask that people talk to their agent and ask for obviously a recommendation or a few recommendations, but also ask your lender who they work with, because oftentimes as the title company, we're working very closely with the lender, and that relationship is very important. So knowing who your lender works well with, if you have a good relationship with your lender, they can oftentimes make a recommendation for a title company. And I think that that's a little pro tip that a lot of buyers don't necessarily go to their lender for that resource. And so that working relationship is very important between the title company and the lender. So asking your lender for a recommendation is a great way to evaluate a title company, and also looking up who is going to be the insurer. There are certain big title companies out there like Stewart Title, First American. These larger title companies, I feel, are more safe for the buyer because we are direct underwriter. We insure our own policies. We back the policy ourselves. So I think that that's an important component to getting a title company.
And that leads me to my next question. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me about why it matters to have this insurance.
So our owner's title insurance covers your ownership of the property. It's a one-time fee that you pay at closing, and it covers you for the entire time that you own the property.
Mm-hmm.
There are two types of insurance that we issue: an owner's policy and a lender's policy. The lender's policy is required, but the owner's policy is actually optional. But in 99% of transactions, we issue that policy to the new buyer. It's the type of insurance that you hope you never have to use, but you're happy you have when you actually have to use it, in case someone ever comes forward to challenge your ownership of the property.
Yeah, yeah. So in continuing education classes, the example that sticks out in my mind about this is, a transaction happens. There's a spouse who is sitting at the table saying, yes, I am, part owner of this home that we're selling. And then you find out that there's another spouse that actually was the owner. That person didn't have ownership. And so then there is a dispute. And just going to court for that could run thousands of dollars, even if there's no fault that you have done.
Exactly. And our company would advocate for you in that exact example. That's actually one of my favorite examples of a title kind of nightmare that can happen. I was sitting with a commercial loan officer this week, and he was telling me in a personal transaction of his, he actually had to use his owner's title insurance to cover him on an IRS income tax lien from a prior owner that the title company just missed. So it covers you for many plethora of things. And that was for a $50,000 loan. So that was that's not something you want on your property.
Yeah, for sure. Tell me about the required lender's insurance. Tell everybody what that's about.
Yes, so the lender requires that any Fannie or Freddie backed mortgage that is closed, the lender requires this insurance to insure them should they ever become the owner. It's guaranteed that they have their own owner's title insurance policy should they ever become the owner of the property as the lender via a foreclosure or something like that. But it's required for them, so they're buying the insurance for themselves. So I always joke with the buyers, I'm like, why would you not just buy the insurance for yourself as well if this is something the bank is feeling is so important for them? I think, yeah. And it's a one-time fee, so.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Okay, so talk to me a little bit about the evaluation of settlement charges. Just start at the top and go for it.
Okay, perfect. So settlement charges are interesting. There are two components. You have your lender's charges, so that's your origination fee, your appraisal charges, flood certification fee, all of those charges that come from your lender that are disclosed way up front when you submit your loan application. The second portion of your closing costs are your title charges. So these are government recording charges. That's the charge and the taxes that the government charges on the transfer of the property, which in DC is 1.1% or 1.5%, depending on the purchase price, for example. And that is collected on every transaction. So we calculate those fees and we make sure that those are paid as part of the recording. So when you're evaluating your settlement charges, it's really important to kind of break it down into a digestible blocks. You have one portion that are loan charges, second portion that are title charges, such as the owner's title insurance, lender's title insurance. And I think an important note when you're thinking about your settlement charges to make is that everything is disclosed up front. So when you're looking at what's called your loan estimate, which you receive when you submit your loan application, the owner's title insurance and lender's title insurance is actually already in that quote. So it's very close to what the final number is going to be. Now, with all the disclosure laws, it's a lot easier for us to disclose fees up front and get the buyer a better idea of what they'll have to bring to the table. Yeah. So I think that could alleviate some anxiety for buyers.
So someone goes to a lender and they ask the lender because they're going to be shopping lenders, they ask the lender for an estimate of their costs. That estimated cost is going to include the costs that would be incurred with the title company. But those are guesstimates, but they have to be guesstimates that are pretty accurate. Talk to me a little bit about what is a boundary survey? What is a location drawing? Tell me about flood insurance. Just break some of those things down.
So I think I can most closely speak to the survey questions. So a boundary survey is actually when the surveyor goes out and he walks the property, he or she walks the property in the boundary line, and they actually stake out the property to show this corner to this corner is now your lot line. And they actually put in stakes in the ground. Those surveys generally run into the thousands of dollars. We don't perform those on every property, but some, if the buyer is going to put up a fence, we always recommend that they get a boundary survey. That's the higher class of survey. A location drawing is when the surveyor goes out to the property, takes a look at what's on the property, and via the reference points, let's say there's a shed in the background, in the backyard, and then the house is up front, the surveyor will show what the distance between those two objects are on the lot and just shows where everything is situated within what looks to be the natural lot lines of the property. And this is very important for buyers. And those generally go for $275 to $300. So, and for flood insurance, those are run by the National Flood Association, and they kind of dictate what level of class of flood insurance that you'll be in, but that generally will come from the lender as well.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what sets Stewart Title apart.
Yeah, of course. So I kind of touched on it at the beginning, but we're a direct underwriter, which means that we issue the policy. So when you get your insurance policy, at the top of it, it's going to say Stewart Title. It's not going to say another third-party insurer. The second thing that sets us apart is that I can actually close transactions in all 50 states via Stewart's reach and breadth. And we also do international closings, which with my international background helps me coordinate those kind of closings very closely with the buyers and kind of head off at the pass any possible complications that may come from having a buyer, let's say, that's closing in California on a house or closing in DC, for example, or even in Dubai or something like that. So we can kind of get ahead of those issues. I kind of wear two hats. I'm a settlement officer and I have my title background, but what I do with my relationships with my agents is really important, especially my buyer's agents. I actually sit and work with them to come up with marketing plans, lead generation ideas. I have the ability to draw a line around an apartment building, for example, and get the mailing addresses for that apartment building so that buyer's agents can target those renters to hopefully convert them into homeowners. I can do the same thing with fee simple ownership. A condo building, I can draw a line around it and I can actually get the phone numbers, email addresses, mailing addresses and names of all the owners in that building so that you could target them to either spin their equity into a new home purchase or something like that. So I think that I wear my marketing hat in that relationship business and building is really something that sets me apart personally.
You had mentioned when we were chatting before that you have spent a few years living in the Netherlands. That sounded like a pretty exciting experience, but then you ended up coming back here to the States. Tell me a little bit about that.
It was a great experience. Unfortunately, COVID happened, so it brought us back to the United States. But while I was living there, aside from enjoying European life and riding my bike around a medieval city, I was able to work in operations for a DC real estate team here locally. So working remotely, I was able to do all of her operations, her marketing. She would hand me, with my title background here in DC, I would get the contract in and manage it from contract to close because she's like, I don't want to deal with another title company given your experience. So can you take this off my plate? But during that time, I really was able to hone in my marketing skills. So I don't know if it was the European air or what it was, but it got my creative juices flowing. And I think I'm bringing that portion back to my job here now locally and that kind of creative experience. I understand how a team functions now. So all these things, it was a great experience.
Anything that you want to share as sort of like a heads up for people that may have questions about what exactly what title people do?
Sending a wire, for example, I realize is very anxiety inducing for buyers with all the wire fraud going on. I think that alone is a nightmare scenario. Wire fraud is such an important thing that we do and try to avoid. At Stewart, we have a special app that we use to deliver wire instructions so that nightmare scenario of a stolen wire does not happen. And I always pick up the phone, and I'm a phone call person. As much as people don't like it sometimes, I pick up the phone and I call the buyer and confirm the wire instructions over the phone. Right. They have a person to work with and a voice and someone that they know. So that would be one nightmare scenario, is a wire fraud.
I will just to let people know, if you are in a transaction and you ever get a regular email that says anything about changing your funding or where you should send it, just remember that no title company is going to be sending you any information like that through regular mail. It always should be secure. So if you get anything funky or weird, contact the people who are in the transaction, the lenders, the title people.
It's a terrible situation, and having a wire go to the wrong place that you can't get back is a nightmare that I never want to happen to anyone that I work with. That's all the wisdom that I was hoping to get out on the table today, and I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to your listeners and to speak with you today. It's been really great. I have a social media account that I post kind of tips and tricks on at titlepartnerpete on Instagram. If you'd like to follow me and connect with me there, I post little tips and tricks about marketing and how you can leverage your resources like a title company to help with things like lead generation and all that stuff.
Wonderful. Okay, Peter, we're going to share your links in the body of the information below the podcast. So Peter Parente, a settlement and business development officer with Stewart Title. He works out of the Washington, D.C. office. Peter, thank you so much for joining me on Listen Up Home Buyers. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Vic. It's been a pleasure.